Storytelling, one of the most effective ways for us to be able to tell our stories, but also to create understanding, being able to establish the commonalities that are shared between us, but also be able to mend the bridges that prevent us from being able to connect with each other in a meaningful way. My name is Sihle Polani, and welcome to the Workplace Revolution. Today, I'm joined by Ondela Mlandu, and she is a multi-hyphenate and literally a multi-hyphenate. Often how I feel when I'm asked, so what do you do? I'm like, everything. So just to share with you a little bit about her, Ondela is an award-winning hyphenate in the digital media space and has working experience in journalism, marketing, digital marketing, and radio broadcasting. She has also done broadcast journalism and has hosted podcasts for startup entrepreneurship platforms where she's had the opportunity to sit with many influential business owners and entrepreneurs in South Africa. Ondela was recently awarded as part of the class of Mail and Guardian's Top 200 Young South Africans 2022 in the film and media category. Ondela has taken on a new role as a communications officer at a blue chip company in South Africa. In addition to her contribution to the media and communications industry, she is part of the Global Shapers community. The Global Shapers community is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. Girl, look at you. Go off. I so love it when I get to have conversations with Black women who are doing incredible things that when you think about when we were growing up, you could have never imagined that this was a possibility or even within reach. So, how did it all begin for you?
Oh, firstly, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm always used to being on the opposite side of the table, asking the questions. So this definitely feels a little bit out of my comfort zone. But here, it's always so strange when I hear my bio, because I think just doing life and going, I'm a tick boxer. I just want to, tick things off and get them done. But it is quite yeah, taken aback a bit. But just to, start off, I mean, I storytelling for me and how I was raised, it all formed a large part of like was part of my upbringing. I mean, growing up as an only child with a mother who's an educator, and a dad who's highly intelligent, and just an intellectual, beautiful man, who would always gift me with books. I think that's the start of this curiosity and the start of, where I find myself today. I mean, I just always think of my first memory, or first few memories in my first 5 years. My mom used to study part time and she had a study group, and they always used to meet in the library. And that was my first introduction to a library card. I mean, spending 3 hours on a Saturday just roaming in between those, those shelves, smelling the pages, being introduced to nonfiction books, really, really shaped, who I was. And I just remember at 12 years old then starting to write songs and being curious about music and how we can share stories there.
Mm,
In our home, magazines were a thing, legacy brands, your Monas, your True
mm,
Loves, Drum, Destiny. My mom was an avid collector, which I think also contributed to me being in the roles that I've played and been. And then from transitioning then to, uh, the print and digital magazines, a little bit of radio, copywriting for different agencies. That's also, a part of storytelling, to podcasting and then radio, and now finding myself in the world of corporate where I'm storytelling for different brands. Um, all interlinked, and Oprah always calls it a full circle moment. So
yeah.
it's one of those, I definitely
Mm.
say.
What, in your view, is the importance of storytelling?
Oh, it's such a fundamental part of who we are as human beings. We all share stories, whether it's stories about our families, our experiences, the work that we do. I think stories, just our narratives as a whole, have been shared in just about every single culture, as a means of, entertainment, as a means of education, how we preserve our own culture. And I also think instilling certain morals and values, is a form and a part of storytelling. I know that for me, storytelling and sharing different narratives really helps me make sense of the world. Um, Stories have really helped me share information in a way that creates an emotional connection with humans and builds a sense of community.
Mm.
And that's the importance of, of storytelling for me, is being able to connect with people, being able to build those connections and those emotional connections, creating a sense of community that will hopefully live on.
Absolutely. You know, when we think about communication and storytelling, particularly in the context of being professionals, and I know certainly from a corporate background myself, that's like the soft stuff, right? The stuff that nobody is like, yeah, okay, let's do it just because we have kind of, it's a thing that's done. But the value of it has never really truly been understood, in terms of the actual value for a brand and its ability to connect with consumers and with communities and with employees, etc. But we
Absolutely.
are now starting to see more and more research that is proving what we have known all along, which is around the fact that the power of our collective lies in our ability to be able to interact with and relate to the stories that we share with each other. How do you see the way in which storytelling has evolved currently and will continue to evolve? How would it aid us as a global community to be able to build societies that are safe and that are inclusive and that are productive for all of us?
Mm. A few days ago, I saw a post by award-winning editor Asanda Sizani, and she said, to understand the past, we have to understand the past so that we can create the new. And I feel as though in corporate spaces as well, communication is sometimes underlooked, probably the most undervalued department as a whole. But it's so important because we want to convey messages that form part of something bigger. I look at communication in all spheres, in terms of if you're working on a campaign or if you're doing something, those infographics, those stats, those examples, those illustrations are all working towards forming something bigger. But it doesn't stem from there. I think it starts with our forefathers, and even before that. I think Africans are so resilient and have always had storytelling in our veins. If you ask anyone who's old, they'd tell you that storytelling was a part of Africa, with villages where people would congregate around a fire and stories would be told. And I always look at the role of storytelling as just more than education and entertainment. I think our people were resilient enough to be storytellers, to be historians, and to be ambassadors for all our different cultures. And looking at just how storytelling forms a large part, it just doesn't stay with, it doesn't mean storytelling is only in magazines. It's in data science. There's, an art form of how do you storytell in leadership? How do you storytell in science and marketing and business? And I think it's a whole lot bigger than us, but it's how effectively do you communicate so that you'll be able to connect with someone. And just thinking about how, sorry, Siti.
No, go ahead.
There's also a book that I came across a while ago. It's called uh, These Are the Things That Sit With Us. And it's a book that's edited by Mpumla Gobodo Madikizela. And just bringing it back to the South African context, I really love the book because it inspired so much of, and it documents so much of, South African history and our country's brutal past. But it's such a compelling read, and it's so important. But what I love the most about this book is how it really bridges the cultural divides, in the sense that it's written in 3 different languages, in Xhosa, in English, and Afrikaans. Which gives the reader just the opportunity to really listen to the full story in their mother tongue. And I think there's such rich layers of meaning when stories are told and preserved in our own languages. And it starts with that, between different races and different cultures, and being able to understand something that's told in your own language can surely unlock some kind of understanding amongst all of us as South Africans. So yeah.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And, so the question I want to ask you is, we obviously have a myriad of stories to tell because, we've been in existence for so long and there's been so many evolutions and transitions that we have experienced. And when you think about the context of storytelling, there's obviously, and with just communication in general, there are barriers that can prevent or hinder effective communication and the sharing and receptiveness towards stories, particularly in the context of a country like South Africa, where we have the racial divide. We're coming from a history of apartheid. Our democracy is still very new. There are gender issues. There are cultural issues even within our Black communities. There are issues around patriarchy and how it has impacted on all of us. And if somebody has been raised in a particular way and they hold certain beliefs, oftentimes when they are, even if they have some level of curiosity, that would lead them to some form of storytelling, there is often barriers that exist. Like they are seeking for things that will confirm what they know or confirm what they believe and reject that which challenges what they've always known because it feels like a challenge to their entire identity. So, what are some of the ways that we can penetrate those barriers to be able to really open up the conversation, particularly the difficult conversations?
Absolutely. I think in essence, in order to be a good communicator, a good connector, you have to find things that are, an experience or things that resonate with other people. People read books, and people want to communicate, want to be communicated with in a way that makes them feel heard, in a way that makes them feel validated. And I think it's the responsibility of storytellers to make people feel like they're not alone. And I think one, you want to know who you're communicating to, knowing your audience, and knowing the kind of people you want to reach, knowing their demographics and knowing how deep we can go with these conversations. I always say, because we live in such a diverse country with so much history and so much hurt still, you almost don't ever want to offend anyone. But how do we not? We need to address certain situations and certain things, the elephant in the room, as they call it, to be able to get to those places of healing and understanding. And I think first and foremost, it's just being able to engage in those conversations. Myself as a storyteller, I always ensure that I know who I'm writing for. People always say, come to the level where people are at. And that's the start. Think about what you want to achieve with whatever you're aiming to put out, be clear and concise. And sometimes it may get personal, but being personal is what is needed. Sharing your experiences, sharing your story and your hurt and your, what you've experienced in order for you to be able to resonate with the next person. But like anything, I think it's being able to engage in the most uncomfortable conversations. And being able to talk about the things that have, created, or things that have really been a part of our history in order to be able to start new, and be able to rebuild in a positive way.
Absolutely. And obviously with storytelling, and particularly when we're talking about lived experiences, there are so many nuances that we need to bear in mind. Um, and just going back to your point around being able to know your audience, there's the nuances, there's the level of education that you've got to navigate, being able to determine what the right language is to use, the types of words that you would be appropriate for your audience, where you kind of, and I always think corporate is such a great example of this, where you will have to develop communications that are company wide, but across the company, you've got executives and managers who've got like degrees and masters and PhDs, and you've got cleaning staff who may have a matric or a diploma or whatever the case may be. And that one communication must speak to and resonate with and make sense to every single person all the way up.
Mm.
How do you think that we can navigate those kinds of challenges? Because if I think about it, I'm a storyteller, I know my audience, and I create content that is around that particular audience because that audience has chosen me and my platforms, right? But when you're in an environment where it's a lot broader, the scope of your audience is broader, the level of understanding is broader, and being able to understand certain concepts is so much broader. How have you navigated that?
Um, for me and some of the editors that I've worked with in the past, they always say, write as in simple form, write so that the next person who's probably never dealt with the topic that you're trying to communicate will understand. And I always keep it simple. And I think that's how we bridge the gap. You want to convey, take complex subjects, and make them as simple as possible so that the next person can understand. But I think also nowadays we're so spoiled for choice. Yes, storytelling isn't anything new. We've got it stemmed from many years ago, but we've also got technological advancements and different ways in which we can convey messages and stories. The power of podcasting. That's something that's, being able to speak to a larger audience. The power of radio, and just thinking about how our grandparents used to tell stories in the beginning. In Xhosa we call it inzomi, which is folktale. Them being able to listen to amabali on umhlobo wenene and listen to stories, and create all these different images and before they even had TVs, I think is so powerful. But also speaking to people in their languages, I can't stress that enough. I think not many signage and not many forms of communication, do that these days. And I just remember at the start of COVID, where COVID was trying to, they were trying to explain the pandemic and what COVID is about. And I remember some of the first few posters that were designed by, the World Health Organization, they were predominantly in English. And I always used to think of the people in the Eastern Cape and rural areas who would not necessarily understand what this disease or this thing is that was coming to change our lives completely. And just being able to start small, take those things and translate them into a language which everyone can understand. And it's so beautiful seeing more and more authors writing books in their mother tongues, and also having those books translated so that a larger audience can enjoy them and read them and be able to understand in a language that's their own. I think that holds so much weight.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things, just thinking about, when we bring it closer to home, we and generations before us grew up with that culture of stories being told, listening to your grandparents' stories and them talking about their parents and what it was like, and our parents would speak to us. And I'm finding that, now we're starting to lose that, where that storytelling element within the home is kind of just disappearing more and more, and kids are growing up with stories being told by other people about their lives and their experiences, and kids don't actually know about their own story, about their lineage, about their history, etc., etc. So for people who are listening, how can they reestablish that culture within their own homes to encourage the storytelling and the sharing within their homes or with their children, whoever?
As you were saying that, I just went back to when I was about 7 and I was tasked to create a family tree for school. And now looking back at it, it is so valuable and so important. But I wish I still had that family tree because my grandparents were still alive back then and I could see and trace our lineage from my mother's side and my father's side. And having those conversations with them sharing how it's up to me as a youngster to help preserve our culture and figuring out what our, family stories are. And I think it goes back to that, sitting with the elderly in your family to try and trace back, where are you from? I've really taken a keen interest in just learning about my culture even more now as I'm getting older and wanting to, trace back to, where I come from, am I fully Xhosa? Am I a part of something else as well? And I think it really goes back to that. That's how do we preserve, our heritage. And also I think there's great power in libraries, preserving the treasures inside libraries. People undervalue the library so much, but if you go into a library, you will find just about every single folktale, every fairy tale, every fable, fiction, nonfiction. And there's great power in it. And I know there's a great rise of, audio books and digital books now as well. But there's nothing quite like holding a magazine or holding a book and being able to flip the pages through. And for me, that's the sweet spot. So for families who really want to preserve their culture, I think it goes back to, engaging in those conversations, sitting as a family and talking about, this is where we come from. This is, your grandfather, this is what they did. And I think that's the only way to really create, continue building on the legacy in all our families.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, I follow you on social media, and I know you share quite a lot of your work, particularly on Instagram. And I think that there's so much value in people being able to go and look at what people like you are doing, as you go about your journey of telling the most beautiful stories that are so beneficial and so interesting and that spark curiosity. So, for anybody who isn't following you, where can they find you and where can they find your work and maybe get some kind of inspiration that'll help them, pursue that journey of telling their own stories?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, Ondela Mlandu, also on Instagram, Ondela_M. As you're saying that, I'm just thinking about how I myself I'm a product of, women who were storytellers and women who inspired me to build. I mean, Dr. Nokolo Krokum, Mamtin Amhlope, she used to write stories and music for years, and she preserved the art and heritage of African storytelling. Black female magazine editors, were part of my journey as well. Kangidlo Mo, Noni Gaza, Nondando Mboso. And so I draw from those women and women who've helped me build as well. So yeah, I'm available on Instagram and on LinkedIn.
I love it so much. Thank you so much, Ondela. And I think, this has been such a great conversation to have. And I hope that it leaves you feeling inspired. I hope that it sparks your curiosity, not just about yourself or your family, but also just about what's happening in the world and what other people's stories are. And as we, weave this fabric of society, our society, and build I think it's so important that the ability to be able to document moments in history and our journeys for future generations, just as we are benefiting from the stories that were told before we came onto this earth. So, Ondela, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your work. And thank you for being on the Workplace Revolution.
Thank you so much, Sihle. Onwards and upwards. I love your podcast.
Thank you so, so much. And thank you for joining us for another episode of the Workplace Revolution with me, Sihle Bolani. I'll see you again next time.